So question number one from Dan. Curt or Martin, have you seen the Sovereign Nation videos episode Balkanization? Basically, it highlights that we are all being played. First, the left, globalist and Chinese interests creates a problem, then as their solution, promotes grievances, real and imagined, on all sides. From each group, seemingly arises defenders, including Christian nationalists, to balkanize, resulting in eventual dissolution of the United States, carving up in tidy, controllable units. The process: 1. Destabilization by the left. 2. Natural local religion division. 3. Reconstitute as global administrative zones, not nation states. Any opinions? Their plan is far larger and more sinister than many first imagined. The first step is probably understanding the real context, meaning some of this is not some of this is not cause and natural law effect, but instead plan, which ties into bigger manipulation, which ties into the real ultimate plan. It's next level stuff. They aren't playing around.
Martin, you're muted. Martin, you're on mute. You got to start over. Although I tell you, there's something, just a bit of sarcasm, because I got to tease Martin all the time. Is that there's something pleasurable about you having a silence button for you when you're criticizing me. So I kind of like now that I have this magical power. Maybe I can use that in the future.
Well, this time I wasn't criticizing you, but Lindsay.
Okay, go ahead, start over.
I don't watch Lindsay because I couldn't stand his supposedly Russian centrism, fake liberalism, and punching right to people that often know better than him for several hours. So I'll just address the arguments presented in the question. I don't see this supposed Chinese influence. I'm sure they're making some efforts to reduce the power of their competitors and increase their own as any power would, but their influence is dwarfed by the real authors and spreaders of leftism, the Jews. And they don't want Balkanization, they want more centralization. Certainly, the smart ones must know that white men are the supermajority of productive people they extract from. So the last thing they would want is to no longer be able to do that, and they also wouldn't want us to thrive. As for this supposed threat of globalists governing what remains of the United States, they are already doing that within the United States and the West at large, because, again, this has nothing to do with China other than perhaps seeing the Chinese state as an inspiration for what the end result might look like. If China and possibly Russia are indeed trying to contribute to the dissolution of the United States, oh well, it's a lesser evil for us compared to the things staying as they are now. That said, I don't see the dissolution happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Martin. That's correct. So anything to add here? I like that you're picking on Lindsay, because at some point I love some of the work he's done, but he's like it's like he can't take any criticism at all, and it's like half of what he says is fake. I just can't. It's very frustrating. Anyway, I'm still glad he's doing the work he does, but you can't take anything more than that. Martin's right.
For starters, he claims he's a liberal and then he supports civil rights law and refuses freedom of association.
Yes. Yes, the original problem is the post-war Jews, pre and post-war Jews, but it's certainly the Jews. No, they don't want balkanization. That's right. They want more centralization. That's right. Certainly the smarter ones know. Yeah, I mean, they know this, but it's like you got to understand how much of an instinct this is for them. Is they're cognitively feminine. They have the feminine. They have a feminine group evolutionary strategy. So they're going to rebel against constraint at any time. because they're going to rebel against all Western demands, that they be as responsible as we are for the commons, and they can't do it. They can't tolerate it, not alone do it. It would mean that they would have to give up their separateness and their identity, which is why they don't do it. Your argument to the globalists is correct. And that both China and Russia, well, they're just taking advantage of the opportunity. I mean, I said this just the week that Russia invaded Ukraine in 22, was that the likely outcome is the unification of China, Iran, and Russia against Western influence, because you have the three remaining agrarian empires. In other words, the three remaining empires, and these empires to some degree are necessary for China, Russia, and Iran, because they're both, unlike Europe, which we've been civilized for a long time. Russia has the problem of the uncivilized East. China has the problem of the uncivilized West. And Islam has the problem of the uncivilized everybody. And so, if you want to develop a core state that has they're actually doing a pretty good job of it. In other words, they're following their incentives. The problem is that all three of these organizations are pursuing the strategy for the benefit of the people in power at the cost of their populations. And so, you could say, well, it'd be great if we saw China, Russia, and Iran to continue imperialism in the sense of constraining their civilizational members or proxies to productive behavior. But they're not. They're actually creating additional conflict and in order to maintain nationalism or power, and they're doing it at the expense of the local population. So I don't see sometimes in the West, among conservatives, we would like to see more authoritarian defense of our commons than we're seeing. And so it's easy sometimes to look at these other cultures and say, I wish we did more of that. And I completely understand. That's what monarchies are for. It's not what democracies are for. And if democracies were given this rule of law, they would fall apart. So basically, I'm agreeing with Martin on everything like usual. So there's two things I want to bring up here that are the most important of which is my long-term effort to prevent conservatives from oversimplification. Sometimes I attack this as conspiracy theory. I think that given that Martin's talked me out of doing that because so many of the conspiracies have turned out to be true, I just want to talk about it in a sense of oversimplification. The reason these things are happening in the world are because it's the rational self-interest of the parties involved. There's nothing more than that. And it's the rational self-interest of the parties involved because they're continuing their group evolutionary strategy. And they're continuing their group evolutionary strategy because no crisis they've encountered has been sufficient to overcome it. And no, they haven't modernized sufficiently, in other words, to produce rule of law, sufficiently to overcome those in ancestral traditions. So, Jews want to preserve separatism in their unique identity that gives them bonding. The Russians want to preserve their belief in the peerage of Russia and the West, rather than Russia as just another European country or part of Christendom. The Chinese, of course, they have a chip on their shoulder for historical reasons, and this guy, which is that they were really the best place for a very long time. And so when they had a problem with modernity. They saw this century as very disrespectful to their history. And then you had the communists and the current fellow, what's his name? Why is it skipping me now? Francis, how do I correctly pronounce his name?
Xi Jinping.
Huh?
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping, he's of course, he really believes in the communist nonsense. He's really one of those people. So, which is unfortunate because rural Chinese people tend to be pretty sweet, and it's unfortunate. Anyway, so we have some remnants around that modernity hasn't gotten to, and as I've tried to make the argument earlier in the week, we're Europeans, and our European way of war is as unique as our European weirdness in other categories, and that means that we are trying to settle. We see war as settlement of political differences, despite the unanimity of our peoples. And so historically, and Ben Kreveld and Keegan both do a good job of writing about this, is that we tend to think that fighting a war and winning a war and settling a war on our terms is what other people do, and it's not the same. So when we came to the end of World War II, we didn't. We ended World War II the way we would end a war of Europeans, which is that this matter is now settled. Let's not go any farther. But what happened was that Patton in Russia and MacArthur in China were both correct, and that you need to stomp out these problems permanently, so that they can be reconstructed, rather than what will always happen is cultures will double down. So by doing that, we left open the First World War, we left open the Second World War, we left open, and we are now at the final stage of what I see as the third, which is the Third World War, which was the attempt to end the age of agrarian empires and complete the transition to modern American nation states and federations, where each civilization has a core state, which tends to be the policing agent on its other members, or the constraint on its other members, and so that the core states function as a sort of political system that allows civilizations to work together. Because while people don't want to face this, civilizations basically represent races, and races basically represent geographies and demographics, and there are needs for civilizations to be slightly different, because the institutions possible are different. So, if you put the East Asians, like Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese, together with Europeans, we're all capable of basically the same stuff, because for demographic and geographic reasons. But that's not true for all the rest of the world. They have persistent problems that have to do with not only the geography they're in, the productivity of it, but they have demographic liabilities, as unpleasant as that for me to say. I'm not saying go out and do anything awful. I'm saying the needs of the governments are different. So there's a tendency for conservatives to try to look for what we would consider a moral person to blame. That's the moral our intuition, right? The conservative intuition among simple folks is someone needs to be blamed. And so they reduce it to something that's actionable, because conservatives are action oriented. We want to solve the problem. So this is where I get in this issue. I hope I'm making this art clear enough for the audience. There are just natural things going on in the world. There are conspiracies in the world. Most conspiracies are actually just conspiracies of common interest. In other words, they're pursuing their rational self-interest. And there's not actually coordination among them, other than they're all coordinated by pursuing their interests. And so conservatives tend to, for some reason, that's why I'm such an advocate of teaching economics. So you learned the coordination problem, is so that we get to this position where the conservative mind wants to oversimplify what is not simplified at all. So, for example, when you tend to look at the Jewish problem or our problem, any civilization's problem, is that you tend to say these people of this intellectual class are leading this conspiracy, that like they're generating it. That's not true. What's happening instead is there's a bunch of common incentives that give rise in this population, that give rise to an elite who then use the words that they have available to them to organize people so that the people have a means of understanding and persisting their group strategy or goal. So in other words, conspiracies, when you say there's a conspiracy, well, there's a conspiracy of common interest because there is a common interest, and elites form to take advantage of moving people towards a common interest. So I would be less, I would try to get I would generally try, and I know I'm probably fighting an uphill battle with this one, is try to think about not saying this is a conspiracy of them trying to do this, rather than there's a bunch of incentives, and the incentives are the problem, not the people who are coming up with the means to take advantage of them. So you can't attack the people like you could correct them to be moral, right? You should be moral people and think like we do. You can't do that. They are, in their terms, following their rational incentives. So they are being moral by their terms. It's not true, but they think they are. So you can't do that. You have to instead say, what are the incentives that are causing these elites, these people with direct intentional malice? What is causing those people to evolve? It's incentives. We have to attack incentives. That's what we have to attack. And I know that's harder for the conservative mind, because we of course want to personalize it. We want somebody we can punch in the face, basically. But unless you kill the incentives, you will never kill the formation of elites. Does that make sense? You have to kill the incentives to kill the formation of elites that pursue those incentives. All right, did I do okay there? Did I get that across?
Yeah, but I kind of see this as a false dichotomy.
Okay, fine.
People call this conspiracies and call them out. They don't argue that they don't have incentives to do so. They usually agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to make the opposite argument, though. The argument I'm trying to make, which I want to get, which I mean, I don't think you disagree with, is even if you kill the elites, if the incentives exist, the new elites form.
Otherwise,
yes, that's the point.
Yeah, but also we seek to criminalize that behavior, and
yes.
Well, if we seek to criminalize it, then don't we agree that it's blameworthy? Why would we criminalize?
Say again?
Because we seek to criminalize that behavior, which implies that we agree that it's blameworthy.
Yes. Okay, great. Oh, I see. Well, okay. So now here it goes. Here's another thing. This is why it's so great to have Martin and I on the same panel. So when you say it's blameworthy, we've talked about the difference between causality, responsibility, and blame, and blame, right? We've talked about that. So I tend to look at it as, well, yeah, they're the cause. Yeah, they're responsible. But when people are bots, are they to blame? And so I think this is the
idea of justice is that we don't punish people who aren't to blame.
Hold on, but how do you define blame? I think blame implies that morally they're in the wrong. That's my interpretation. It might be incorrect. So while
that would be incorrect. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be incorrect, but it's not precise enough to avoid people misinterpreting it. It's that causality means, look, I dug the hole, right? The person, I had the responsibility is, well, I dug the hole where somebody could fall in it. All right, but am I to blame? Well, I'm responsible, but I'm not to blame. In other words, I have to pay I have to provide restitution, but blame means you have to get punishment.
Right.
So in the sense you mean it, you're correct, right? In other words, there's a difference between responsibility and blame. And the responsibility means, well, you need to pay restitution. Blame means you should have known better.
Right.
And you violated you violated the normative contract with others.
You violated it despite knowing better. I guess
Right.
to use in law we punish it differently. So let's say take the extreme case, right? Homicide, right? Homicide, it could be manslaughter in that you accidentally kill somebody,
Yes.
or it could be intentionally murder.
Right.
And we punish those. I mean, if you look at the simple fact,
Yeah,
right, the person died, but we punish those crimes much more with much more different degrees of severity.
well, sure, because if you know, if you're responsible for causing the death of
Mhm.
another person, but it's not through being irresponsible, or it just, you know, because it's not possible to remove all accident from existence, right? It's
Right.
going to happen. Right? Then there's crimes of passion. You walk in on your wife and some guy, and you break his neck, which would, by the way, I would used to be you used to be able to get away
Yes.
with that almost all the time. Um, uh, I'm not sure why you can't break your wife's neck too. I mean, that's like the problem. You can break the other guy's neck, but you can't break your wife's neck. I don't know. Anyway, so that's a crime of passion, right? You should have controlled it, but you didn't. But you didn't plan it, right? I mean, now that's another kind of accident. But when you actually plan to murder somebody and
Mhm.
carry it out, that's not any kind of accident. We gotta because not you anybody who would do that and not self-regulate it, you got a problem. So we have those 3 degrees. So yes, your example is correct.
Well, I just want to add a couple of points. Well, one, back to the Patton and MacArthur thing. You have to fight the enemy on your terms, but you can only defeat the enemy on their terms. So in that sense, I guess Russia and China, even in Korea or whatever, never consider themselves defeated. The same
Correct.
thing with the Islamists in what is it's called Afghanistan and Iraq and so on and so forth, right? And I think that's a very foreign concept for Westerners to understand
Yes.
in the civilization, in the process of domesticating male violence, in making
Yep.
these wars simply between armies rather than between societies. Westerners essentially lost the frame of what the rest of the world think of as war. For China,
Correct.
war, like any kind of war with neighbors and so on, it could be existential threat.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, a simple battle, or even when you say the war is over, the series of battles is over, it doesn't mean that the war is over.
Yeah. Exactly. And it doesn't mean nothing. Basically, nothing has changed except opportunity.
Hmm.
Right. That's all it's changed. And this way, I get ridiculed for saying this all the time, but it's not ridicule in military philosophy. Is that the West civilized warfare? We call it domestication of warfare. I mean, almost ritualized it.
Hmm.
Well, you guys kill a lot of people. I mean, yeah, I know, but I mean, but if you look at what we don't do, that's what matters, right? I mean, that's what's the difference is. And so the whole point of Western war is, we want to improve this, my control of this territory. I mean, it's more like business, doing business, right? You might fight this group today, and then next month you'll be like doing trade.
Hmm.
It's fighting is more of a duty on behalf of the polity than anything else, right? And the wars of religion were for us were very similar to I mean, China. If I wish I keep telling people, why the fuck do we study the Middle East? It's pointless. Study China because it's the one that's like us, right? But I mean, if you go through China's wars, Jesus, the consolidation of China was hard, right? It took forever. It was a lot of so China had its warring states period. We had ours. It's just, but ours was over. We say it's over religion. It's not. I mean, religion is just an excuse. The same for slavery. It was the excuse. It was really over control, power, and whatever, the self-determination. I got lucky because I studied Chinese history in college. I mean, I studied Chinese history, Chinese language. It was fascinating to me. And why? Because I was interested in the Mongols. So I read the Mongols, and then I said, okay, I'm going to take Chinese history now. I thought it was one of the most beautiful things. And I'm always into this. So like, why do we study that? Why do we talk about the Middle East at all? It's just because we have Christianity. But if you look at it instead as study China and study India, it's way more interesting. To some degree, you look at Japan, and it's very Germanic. It's very similar Germanic history. So I don't know. I just feel we underserve ourselves by focusing on this. Why focus on the people who screwed it up all the time instead of the people who got it right?
Well,
I mean, I
it's
just
a
don't
knee-jerk
understand.
reaction, right? And China's kind of out of the way, and until the last 30, 40 years, it was a agrarian empire. In a sense, it's still kind of an agrarian empire. But I would, I guess, that as the only Chinese influence in this conversation, I would just inject one thing. I think any Chinese leader have to be a astute student of Chinese history.
That's right.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get to where they are.
No.
And if you look at the education, the Chinese history education that they push into the schools these days, ever since the days when I was in school, it was always talking about the 100 years of humiliation from 1840s to the 1940s until the new China, the communist China, was established and so on. And it basically, now that I'm from a Western perspective, I can see it as an agrarian empire that went stagnant and the rest of the world just picked up, and especially the West just succeeded it. But the Chinese don't see it that way.
My argument is China just got big. The problem with big an empire is technology necessary for administration. I mean, that's as far as I look at China, that's what happened. Then in the literature, they say that the problem is once you lose the information system, once you're big enough, the information system can't give you information. You start judging things by morally. And once you judge them morally, you eventually get them ideologically. Once you get them ideologically, you get them ritually. And so when I look at China, the only thing I see is, it's fucking big. There's a lot of people. Right? There's a lot going on, and if you don't have the government technology, then you have to have many small competitors. And so by unifying this so successfully, and understanding Chinese history is complicated, and having that much land and territory consolidated, you can generate extraordinary taxation, you can extraordinary revenue, but actually creating adversarial competition for continuous innovation is actually hard, because you just find stability so much rewarding.
And especially
So it's not good.
Especially the problem with China is the geography. I think we talked about this before. Instead of the western part of China, like the western United States, bordering a nation and nobody can really get through, you basically have the barbarians, right? And ever since the Qin emperor over 2,000 years ago, after he united China, he started building a wall. And walls don't work as well as oceans.
No. But I don't know. I don't see a lot to criticize. The only thing I find when I look at Chinese history as a Westerner that always bothered me is the treatment of human life. And and I noticed it in the arts. That's where I saw it first. And I don't really understand that part of Chinese civilization that well. And I suppose it's just the virtue of having so many people. Whereas in the West, we just didn't have the population. We used to call it small population on the edge of the Bronze Age. So we had to value human life. And secondly, our political order is based on the prohibition on authority, right? So we call it, we say the positiva, which is individual sovereignty, but it's basically a prohibition on authority. And so you ended up with these small places, many small kingdoms, which is not really good economically, right? You need an empire to be able to create standards of weights and measures and standards of behavior and enforce trade. So I don't see a lot of problem with the only thing I see in Chinese history that bothers me is the just killing a lot of people.
Yeah, as a Chinese saying that human lives there is cheap, and I'm not sure how it got that way. I guess it, I'm less of an astute student of Chinese history than you are, so if you don't know the answer to that, I don't know that either.
You sent this to me
History is
before,
my
which I don't know
worst
why I just think
subject.
that's funny.
History is my worst subject back in school because I hated it.
Really?
Yeah, because like memorizing all those days, I have no fucking idea why like this
Oh,
event happened
yeah.
in 1367 or whatever date it is. I hated that thing.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I think date memorization
Yeah, I think they taught
history
it
is
wrong.
pointless.
History
What?
Uh,
now that as an adult after reading about history and if you tie history into geopolitics, which is what it does, then it actually becomes a fascinating project because
Yes,
then you can
exactly.
actually see the causal effects. It's
Yes,
like,
yes.
it's like mathematics or physics or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say the same thing. You need to create a narrative that binds everything together so you can see the causality. Otherwise, just remembering dates. I mean,
Mhm.
I had the same problem, and I have a pretty amazing memory. But when it came to memorizing pieces of art and when they were built, right? I mean, art. I mean, it's like I don't, it's in this civilization in this period, but what the date is, I don't know. Yeah, fucking remember. So you crush before the test, the exam, and then you forget it 3 days later because
Mhm.
you just, it just doesn't stick. All right.
Shall we
Did
move
we
on?
answer this? Did we
I
answer
think
this?
so.
well, I was gonna say that the idea of criminals as bots, well, it's kind of worse than if they're responsible. Because if they can control themselves, that's an argument for getting rid of them from the gene pool.
Yeah, I think the traditional argument is we have to be responsible for them until they're like children, until they're responsible for themselves. But if they're
Well, what
not
if they never will
responsible for
be?
themselves, they have to go. Sorry?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.